Good morning, Russ. I think we are live.
Good morning, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Good to go.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. This is the March 24th, 2026 meeting of the Housing Committee for the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency. We are joined by all members here. We have council online and also our favorite member of the public, our loyal trooper here. Teresa, we appreciate you being here. Our first order of business, unless there's no additions or changes to the agenda.
None.
First order of business then is going to be our RFP discussion and feedback. Just as a note to everybody, as it says here, the text in red is really what we're discussing. I'm assuming the text in black is the standard language from the county that we cannot touch.
Yes.
Okay. So I will open it up either to I guess David, to start the conversation, and there we'll talk about next steps after we discuss feedback.
Super. So I'm glad that we could share this RFP. I think where we left this last time was actually that we were going to go ahead without sharing it again. Except that the state process to get a contract took a lot longer than expected. We just got that draft contract this month. So that made sense to bring this back to you all. It is under review internally with the county contracts as well. So I thought this would be a good time to make sure that we're all on the same page with the direction this is going before we put it out. The dates in it is one thing that will change because I just stopped adjusting them because every time this gets pushed back, all the dates have to move back. So we'll adjust them based on what was out. But my goal is to have it out for 4 to 6 weeks. And then can be in a group to review and choose the consultant. One change that I will say has already been identified that we should include is a detailed budget breakdown, which wasn't listed as one of the requirements, and including scoring for that, which I usually kind of consider as a prerequisite. If you can't do it within the budget, you're just not considered. But thinking about how the consultant could break that out is something that I think is worth including. So that would take away some points from some other categories and give points for the budget breakdown. One additional consideration that actually came up 5 minutes ago in a meeting was that the county has identified funds for grant writing for this year. Part of the scope of this is doing for future CDBG grants. And I think it makes sense our department to put in our, at least as an option, to have the consultant who does the preparation for CDBG grant to then also included in that scope use our funds for writing this year's CDBG grant, since they're so intertwined and we really want someone to do the prep work who also does the writing of the grants. So that would be an additional $8,000 from the county, from the planning and sustainability budget that would go towards that and slightly increasing that scope of work.
Great.
I guess we'll open it up for feedback or questions, anything for David specifically, or for the group to discuss. No? Teresa, I'll get to you in 1 second.
I just was thinking about the selection criteria, and because I like the way it's all framed out. Great. I like the approach. Don't give us the same old kind of issue. But I wondered, because you think it references that a consultant may just go for the CDBG component and not the strategy piece, that the criteria, are they clear enough for figuring out somebody under that criteria, under that, just doing that scope? I just wonder if there needed to be maybe some separate criteria thinking about that scope, because 40 of the points are, capacity of project plan to make meaningful progress. After, and not sure how that would work for somebody who's just doing the assessment of housing conditions and maybe then developing the application. So maybe that does start figuring out. I just want to give that a little bit of a thought in terms of that, and wondering you've got some ideas on how you would analyze whether a project plan is making meaningful progress during and after the plan development, I can see during, did you have some ideas on how somebody could score well in that category?
I did. So something that I always like to do in a planning process to keep it less boring is how can we do some mini projects in this process? Like initial things that I was thinking of with that. I would love to organize, there's a group out of Vermont and New Hampshire that does building interior storm windows as a community build activity. I would love one of our meetings to be doing that and talking about housing. So that we're actually doing something that contributes to housing affordability while we talk about it. So it's not just us. Another idea would be to have a work day with Habitat, that we have some public, question and conversation, but then really do some work.
Just want to make sure you thought about that for those categories.
Teresa had a question
Well, actually, it was a comment.
or comment? Sure, yeah.
And I have to admit, I only got this huge document like 15 minutes ago. I've only looked at the first few pages, but a lot of them are in red. And I noticed under below market housing needs assessment, this is like under program objectives, below market housing needs assessment. They talk about various groups, but don't really specifically mention another one that I think has special needs, you might say. And that's people who work in the city in some low wage jobs, like people who clean hotel rooms and people who serve at establishments that may either open very early in the morning for breakfast or stay open very late at night. So these people have get very little money, and yet they can't use public transportation because it just isn't running at the times when they either have to get to work or from work. I'm afraid that at the moment they tend to live way far away and spend an additional hour in darkness driving and spewing Lord knows what into the atmosphere from their old clunky cars. It would be so good if more of them could live in the city. So taking into account numbers of people who work in low wage jobs, especially, and have very awkward hours.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? How do we feel about giving us the go ahead? Yeah, I think from now I get another. Okay, got 3 head shakes, 4 head shakes. Well, it was relatively short. David, I know a lot of work goes into this collectively, so if you were the only one, thank you. If there was a team of people behind you, then thank them all. Looking forward to getting this out there and seeing the responses and ultimately getting the work product back from whoever we decide to select. Alice?
Just a quick question as a follow-up, that there's references to some studies that have been done, that'll be available to the consultant. I'm not sure if I'm up to date on all of them. Is there a recent infrastructure assessment that can be shared with them?
I mean, recent is vague, but I think it's 2020 is the most recent infrastructure assessment.
Okay, and then I wondered about the draft economic development strategy could also be our input for some of that. It might have to be confidential though, because I don't think it's released publicly.
Right,
But I think
right.
that might provide them with a little more fuller understanding of the economy, which is important for understanding housing.
We have a select group that receives this RFP, or how wide do we cast this net?
So because CDBG money is involved, we'll be casting the net very wide, because we have to specifically solicit WBA businesses. We have a large list that's actually developed by Southern Tier 8 for their housing strategy that just went out, and they had a huge number of responses.
Hey, you two walking? I'm in. If I can cook you one meal, what would it be?
Hey, Rush, you're not on mute.
Sorry, I was just, and my daughter, sorry.
That says it all.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering as information and data is collected, I know that we have a very significant situation right now that has around 181 apartments.
Oh, you had to bring that.
I picked that up.
Later in.
You had to have a meeting, you couldn't have a meeting. Go buy the phone.
Naming it at this point. But I know that we're going to be reviewing some of the situations in that building, and I think the information that comes from that is going to have a great impact on some of these numbers that we see with the 30, 60, 80, 100 AMI. And so I guess I would ask that this not start until some of the pieces fall into place, because we're talking about almost 200 apartments, and my understanding is there could be some people moving around. And so there could be some openings there. They're trying to straighten out who should be there, who shouldn't be there. And I think that could really have an impact on what the study comes out as.
I guess I have two comments. The first, given the pace of state contracting, I'm not super concerned that will get started too soon.
Yeah, right.
But
Good.
the second is that the specificity of the data isn't so specific that would really mess it up.
Okay.
I would love to say that we actually will have data about every room in every building, but generally it's a few levels of abstraction above that.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. My sense is that we'll have some people moving from there to other locations, and we already have. I think we've placed 12
10 or 12.
people in other locations. And I definitely know over the next 2 to 4 weeks, we're going to see some people moving in and out. So thank you.
Russ, just want to give you the opportunity if you have any
Yeah,
comments.
I was gonna ask a question, and I apologize about my phone earlier. So the RFP that's going out for the consultant that will undertake the housing study for the benefit of the community, is that limited to, okay, what's needed, where should it go, who should be the captive, tenants that we're looking for, or will it also include, in light of, the hysteria issues that are going on, any sort of analysis on safety or management arrangements, or is that something separate and apart that we're going to be talking about presumably at some point?
Yeah, so there's really four major components. Two of them are CDBG related, so that's needs assessment and conditions assessment. Those are kind of bureaucratic and tied very specifically to what we and our partners need when we put in a CDBG application for housing. So as the backup for one of those applications, you have to have this enumeration of the housing conditions in the area and the need for different kinds of units. So that's really driving that part of the scope. The other part of the scope is market analysis and strategy for our work. And the part that's strategy for our work can be very broad. It's all of the things that we, as the county, as the IDA, as partner municipalities, nonprofits, think should be done to move towards better housing affordability in the next 10 years. So that isn't necessarily constrained to just a demographic analysis or just a financial analysis. Some of that will be policy things, zoning reform, infrastructure, the ways that we work with development. It could be IDA policy on incentives. There's a lot of things that could go into that. So it's pretty broad and will be driven by the stakeholders and the community engagement.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm gonna take that opportunity then. Next steps is in flux based on procurement review. Has the county attorney reviewed this yet or?
Not yet.
Okay, so procurement, attorney.
Yep.
And then any edits, modifications if needed, and then final release.
Yep.
In your estimation, based on your understanding of those two steps?
The goal is within a month.
Okay,
That may be quick.
got it.
The step, some RFPs we've had review has taken longer.
So are you hoping that, could we maybe say May 30th would be a target to have submissions submitted by?
Yeah.
Okay. And then so work would start mid-July,
Looks like
August-ish? Okay. Any other next steps we should be aware of or you need support with?
not the same.
Okay. And then in terms of a review committee thoughts?
Yes, I don't have the list in front of me, but we brainstormed a diverse group of people that went beyond just this group so that I think when we met and discussed that, we were all men in the room. That was one of the things we were making sure to include some more diversity
Sure.
in the group. I'd be happy to maybe follow up with an email of
Okay.
this.
Okay. Any other questions on this before we move on to the agenda?
I don't-
Shawna?
Yeah, I just wanted on the certification page, whenever it refers to drug-free workplace, can you define that?
No.
Okay. What types of drugs might we be talking about is where I'm going with this?
Legal?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And that's part of the standard county.
Okay,
That I can't change.
we're an ethical, okay?
Yeah. Good for clarification. Okay,
Kelly,
yeah, policy review.
my favorite.
Your favorite. Oh, and I did not include the policy. I can print off the current workforce housing policy real quick if anyone wants that.
Great.
Okay, let me run and do that.
Is that available online?
It is.
It's on the
IDA website.
Okay.
Your policy.
Yes, under policy.
Have a brief commercial break while Kelly goes and does that.
What's your, is it 30% minority women owned enterprise requirement for the state?
They don't actually have a requirement other than proactive outreach. Yeah, so I think I stopped in the middle of saying we have a broad list from STA. It'll be going on Contract Reporter. I'll be doing direct outreach to firms that I know that I think would be good, but we'll also be doing press releases and pretty broad.
Yeah. Great. It's gonna be the memory for that.
I know.
What, paragraph 5, section.
That was the fastest
Yeah.
printer. Mine would still have been loading.
Okay. So I think one of the goals that we've been talking about for a while are to review the existing policies, see what changes might be recommended to be made, and obviously include Russ in this conversation, especially when it comes to supportive services, property management and security, and the included areas of the policy. One thing that was sent out to kind of complement this is a development focus areas map of the county. And this is at the back of the packet. David shared this with me, and it just shows some of the areas that really could be focused for housing. So I thought that would go well with this conversation. One other thing I did want to touch on that was not included on the agenda, but goes along with the policy review, is the contribution to the Community Housing Development Fund. If that amount is still the right target amount for that, and if there should be kind of a benchmark of units where that amount is required. So for instance, we met with someone who is looking at bringing 10 units online. It's a small project. It's like a $1.8 million project. $55,000 for those 10 units is it's a significant lift. So we were just talking about maybe reviewing that and seeing if there should be a benchmark or where that amount kicks in. Just something to consider.
Where did that amount originally come from? How was it determined?
Martha Robertson.
Yep.
What?
Yeah, Martha. They
Really?
came up with that amount, yeah.
I mean, and I mean, I can't believe it was in a completely arbitrary, plucked it out of this guy. But,
Probably not.
You know, Martha?
Based on something.
yeah, I mean, I know.
All I had to do was how much
Analysis of looking at.
for CDBG, you know.
Subsidy that was provided per unit on average at a snapshot in time. And it worked out that about $5,000 was aligned with creating a unit, you know, in terms of that. But a lot of those were tax credit projects that had, you know, 75 units in it, and there was like $100,000 subsidy, you know, or 200,000.
Right.
So it wasn't like a 10-unit project. It was, there's some that are very high efficiency for getting a benefit and some that are low efficiency. And so this was an average at that point in time.
And is the average is the 27.5,
Yeah.
not the 5,000.
Right.
The 5,000 is to get to the.
Right, because the requirement is 20% of your project should have affordable or
Right.
in lieu, so 27,000, 25,000 originally, I think, was the original number. Now it's been updated with CPI to 27.5.
Yeah.
That was my understanding of where that number came from.
And it's near what the Community Housing Development Fund offers, which is 30,000 a unit. So it gets close to, you know, the money goes into the Community Housing Development Fund, and what they do to support one affordable rental is 30,000.
I mean, I would definitely be open to having the conversation for smaller projects because my sense is that if you're doing affordable housing, it's definitely a service to our community, and you're not doing it. I mean, from my calculations, the numbers don't work from a business sense. And so if a developer comes in, wants to do a smaller project, we're not talking about a $60 million project, and is saying, I want to do 10 units of affordable housing, I think we have to work with that because that's 10 units that we did not have before. And truly, for someone to be open-minded enough to even have that conversation, I think we can't just slam the door in their face and say, sorry, you don't meet our eligibility requirements. This might be a niche that we're going to have to look into, especially as we don't have tons of housing projects coming through the pipeline.
And I want to just clarify a little bit that when we're talking about small projects, we're actually talking about small market rate projects that we would exempt from having to provide the payment into the CHDF.
Or a reduced amount.
Or a reduced amount or different terms. I will say often with what's called inclusionary zoning, where you have a requirement that a certain number of units are affordable, there's an exemption for certain small projects. And often that number is 10 units. The thinking being you don't have as many units to spread that cost across. There's an inherent benefit of having these small projects, of having diversity of owners, of not having these buildings, you know, get consolidated into one larger building. So those are the reasons that I think it would make sense to consider some threshold below which so essentially this would mean that a building could get a pilot, a project could get a pilot that's market rate, that's not providing a payment into the fund for affordable housing, or is maybe paying less, or is maybe able to pay later. Part of what is that it's an upfront payment. And there's a big.
Well, and there is that staggered payment that could be done as well, broken into 3 equal installments, but then there's also a fee associated with that. So.
Has anybody tried to make a large payment in the first 3 years of a small unit project before? It's pretty much near impossible.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're trying to get stabilization, you're trying to understand your building dynamics. Typically your interest only payment, right, kicks into full freight on your loan. So the idea of in the first 5 years that there's actually any sort of money left over. And again, it's not to cry poor, right? But I'm just saying like the reality, the economics of these projects, if we want to see them built, and I think built in our development focus areas, or some area like that, right, where we're again trying to, because I think the theory, at least I've been under the understanding, right, as we continue to increase some market rate, it frees up some of the stock that's currently being used for market rate, and as the top of the market is growing, there's then a level underneath that becomes potentially more affordable for folks to move into that maybe aren't at the top of the market. Potentially.
The other pressure up is also there. So
Yeah, there's rate pressure which pulls the middle market up. But I think as we see vacancy continue to increase in the market, I think we'll see landlords in that sort of second tranche of housing stock that's not the brand new full freight market stuff be maybe a little bit more willing to adjust.
And how are we looking at this infill stuff that we're doing in the city, and how are we dealing with that in terms of, these kinds of considerations?
Well, right now, the policy only applies in the city to the, those urbanized areas. So some of the infill might occur there, but there might be other areas in the city that could have missing middle kind of moderate, small scale projects that are not currently eligible, I don't think, other than if the IDA makes an exception. So that might be something to think about to make that, broaden that. On the other hand, I was always comfortable that a project under 5 million didn't make sense to go through the IDA process because of the fixed costs, the fees, and the kind of complicated, transactions that are involved. So, so maybe that argues for a simplified process. It's maybe just sales tax exemption rather than a pilot for a small scale project.
Which is usually where that ends with the landing, is just going for the sales tax and not people bothering to.
So maybe there's another, another model, small scale, or maybe another way to just reduce the cost and make it effective.
Is there a standard to that point? Is there a standard, application, or right? Like I'm thinking about like a common grant application, right? That would just be very simple. It's like, if you follow this process, if you can fill in this and you can pay $5,000, right? Or some sort of minimal fee that doesn't have maybe the same economic burden as sort of a full freight IDA project.
Well, we have to have the common application, just one application, but I'm sure that could be adjusted with, the way it is now, our one application covers everything from the pilot, sales tax, mortgage recording tax. It could just be kind of a check here if you want the simplified benefit, simplified incentive, and it's for those smaller projects. Easy, light.
IDA.
Light.
It's a New York State term.
Can we do that, Russ?
Yeah, you could certainly simplify the application. There are certain, state requirements that in any application that are required to be in there. but you could simplify it. And as Kelly said, they can check the box if they're not seeking a pilot. And, but at the 10,000 foot level with respect to any policy, you just don't want to tie your hands to the point where you have a project that you want to consider, oh, for whatever reason, that is different than what's in the four corners of the scope of your policy. And you could resolve that by simply saying the agency at its discretion can consider any housing project it wants to, and you could have criteria that it has to satisfy, and that could stop at the staff level and attorney level saying, well, wait a second, the board's not even going to consider your project, so you're not wasting your time with it. But you could have a simple, clause in any policy that gives the IDA flexibility to consider something outside of what you would consider within the four corners of your typical policy. So that's not that hard to accomplish, and you don't want to open the door for any project that decides, oh, we want IDA benefits, and then you're wasting your time with them. But I think you could set it up where, again, it could stop at the staff level if it's determined at the outset that this is not something that the board wouldn't consider. I think when you have a policy that's so regimented and so specific, you're limiting your ability to consider projects that don't fit within those criteria. That's just my thought. And again, any project, whether it's housing, manufacturing, or whatever it is, ultimately you have a lot of flexibility, and it's at the board's discretion for any reason, so long as there's a rational basis to accept or deny that application. Um, so
So-
that they, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
No, go ahead.
No, that was just my thoughts on it.
So along those lines, then, the current policy obviously just allows for housing in the downtown density district and Lansing town center. So could those technically be removed in lieu of that language?
Yeah, you can, if you're limited to a certain area of the community, you can expand that, or you could just say, or such other areas that the IDA determines they want to see this type of development. I can give you an example with Monroe County. They had a very regimented, strict housing policy and weren't able to do basically any good housing projects. And there's a lot of activity here. And they recently changed it to provide more flexibility, and they're seeing a lot of activity. Don't get me wrong; they're not just pro forma approving any housing project. They're going through the normal review process, and as they should and are required to. They've made it a little bit easier, because if a developer that's a reputable developer that you want to see do work in your community sees a policy that is going to be too difficult for them to comply with, they'll just either not do the project
Right.
or and walk away. So I'm just putting that out there as an example. And the policy's new in Monroe County, but our firm represents the Monroe County IDA, and they're seeing a lot more activity almost immediately.
Wow, that's great. I'll make sure to review that.
And I'm happy to, Kelly, share their policy. You can get it online, obviously, but I'm happy to share it with you and
That'd
give
be
you
great.
I can do a comparison of what was and what is now the policy,
Yes.
so you can see the changes.
That would be fantastic. Yes,
Sure.
please. Thank you.
Kelly, can you remind us the fee structure for IDA projects?
Yep. So there's the $1,000 application fee, and then the IDA fee is 1% of project costs. And the attorney fees are 1/3 of that 1% in addition.
That 1/3. That's only in certain larger projects. Typically, the projects that we see and other IDA see, it's a flat 1% IDA fee on the total project cost, and occasionally IDAs will vary from that on a case by case basis. The problem with doing that is, if you do it for one party and you're not doing one project and you're not doing it for another, you're creating, potentially some issues on future projects. So,
Our language shows that 1/3 of
yeah,
of
and
that percent.
And there's also a minimum.
And
Well,
the
there-
minimum is,
we have a fee structure also for smaller projects that tries to make them work. So if you have a small project that is, let's say, sales tax only, they don't need the pilot benefits, we can make that work. And we
Yep,
have
and
done
we
that.
have that as well. It's an agreed upon amount between $5,000 and $10,000, which is inclusive of legal fees and the IDA admin fee. And that's for the sales tax only or mortgage recording tax only projects and the
Yeah.
small ones.
And one other thing, and I'm just putting this out there, don't shoot the messenger. You know, one thing that is noted by a lot of potential projects in Tompkins is the mortgage recording tax. That's only the state portion. That's a
I think we're the
policy
only
decision.
IDA that does that.
Yeah, that only does that. So if you have a really large project, you know, that they're borrowing $100 million or something, and they've got to pay that 75 basis point mortgage recording tax, you know, that's a significant dollar. And it just, I'm putting that out there. I don't have a issue with it one way or the other, but I think Tompkins is the only IDA that has that kind of structure.
We'll probably remain with that type of structure moving forward.
Yeah. No, I get it. I'm just putting it out there.
David?
I think it's good for the IDA to have some flexibility. I do worry about opening up to all areas. The IDA can always, I think every UTEP I've ever seen gives you the ability to do something different in unique circumstances, but I do think there's something really good about focusing growth in particular areas, which is why I asked to include the development focus areas map in the agenda, because that's something that has been a long-term planning focus of the county. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it's something that we will also look at in the next few years of where does it make sense to direct growth? How do we want to grow? So we're not just incentivizing sprawl everywhere. But I think there's an argument for going beyond kind of CTAP and the Lansing Town Center.
If Teresa knows, and then Russ, I'll get to you in 1 second if that's okay.
I get nervous whenever I hear about the IDA helping market rate projects, because one result in the city of Ithaca, is that an earlier very narrow density, district that was aimed at density in the central downtown, got a lot of IDA help for market rate projects. The result being that almost nothing was left over for lower income levels. And in fact, I think some of the Asteri problems may originate there, because everything was pushed into this one place where, because it so happened that the city owned a fairly large expanse of land, things could go differently. By the way, the first iteration of that project, it was supposed to be even about 20 units larger. And the neighboring market rate project, assisted by IDA, Harold Square, had snarfed up so much space that they, I think, had a lawsuit against Asteri, and the result was it was down from something like 200 to 180 approximately, with a promise that has never been followed up to supply them elsewhere. Yeah, so I was going to say, now that is a problem in the city of Ithaca where things are already heavily built. It has been somewhat alleviated by expanding the key density area along the State Street corridor and out into the waterfront. But I must say, then you get areas where it's kind of awkward to demand that people walk from the waterfront to the central business district at 5 a.m. or at 1 a.m. if that, to go home at 1 a.m. or something. You're making them walk in the dark a couple of miles. So anyway, there is that. Now that's a city problem. It wouldn't be a problem in these other nodes. Although I must say, when I looked at those nodes, my feeling was you need a car to be there. You can't get there, there's a bus once an hour at certain times and not every day.
Gary? Or sorry, was it who other?
Oh, I was just kind of discussing the same point, is that I think it's important to discuss with the local community if you're going to expand the pilot agreements there, because that community, you want their support for it essentially. And that was kind of the way the CTAP was developed, is the idea consulted with the city, or vice versa. I'm not sure how it means. But the city has not been on board for incentives necessarily in College Town historically, and that's where a lot of development has occurred. So you got to be careful, like if you take that step, who's going to walk through and make the applications? Do those projects need incentives? That's something to consider. But generally, I think just the consultation with the host community is important.
And well, we got an image, the IDA has a bit of an image problem right now. So we're dealing with, a number of things there that have not all together based on, in real fact, but there are some legitimate concerns that I think the IDA is facing right now that some of this would help ameliorate if we could soften it up a bit. What you're saying, Teresa, isn't lost on me. But, I'm also going to make the comment that outlying areas, you get into some of these other areas, are more welcoming from a planning and development standpoint.
Right.
They just make it easier to happen. They want some amount of this happening in their communities. Travel being, certainly is a consideration. It's a big problem countywide in terms of, our travel, public transportation infrastructure. But again, these are the places that we can make real opportunities happen.
And the city has to build parking garages at a great expense to accommodate those people who live out there.
Agreed.
Sure, if they choose to come into the city.
Right.
There's ways to.
Well, I think there has to be a recognition that, people are going to continue to use cars. We can try to make all the
Right.
alternative kind of transportation available, busing and bikes and everything else, but people are going to continue to use cars. So, if we're going to be, if we're going to commit to something outside of the, city, we do part and parcel of that you have to look at that because, I think we can all be aware of the fact of the number of people that leave here every day that work here and are taking those earnings into other communities is another problem we face. And they're going, pretty far away. So, they're leaving Tompkins County in a lot of cases. So that's another area that really should be of concern to us.
Nels, when was the last time a city made great investment in parking structure?
Same as Dairy Project.
Yeah.
Probably.
Green Street Garage.
The adjacent garage.
What is it, opened up like 3 years ago, so there was an investment then as part of that.
The city paid for that?
They are paying for it. They got a long-term lease to repay the debt for the $12 million investment in the Green Street parking garage.
Got it, also offset by the revenue.
Well, and who developed the parking? Was it the Bloomfield Group that developed the parking?
No,
that was adjacent to, or was that a city project?
That's a joint city Grow America project. And that was a $13 million project in 2005.
Yeah, so that was a while ago.
Yeah.
Russ, you had your hand and
just
we
very
jumped
quickly.
all over you.
Yeah, one other tool that you have at your disposal, and actually Kelly brought this up yesterday, I think, that we're going to be talking about in a couple of days anyway, is, New York State does not have a usable TIF legislation. But you can for housing or any project, and it takes the community to support it and the taxing jurisdictions to support it, is you could set up what's called a PIF, a pilot increment financing, where you, with the consent of the taxing jurisdictions, you could divert some of those pilot payments to pay for infrastructure or bike paths or whatever you wanted to help a project and develop areas around it. And essentially the way it works is you would have let's say they're paying $1 under a pilot, which goes to the taxing jurisdictions pro rata. If the taxing jurisdictions, because they like the project, it's a good community project, are willing to divert, call it 25 cents of that dollar to either pay debt service on infrastructure or directly invest it into surrounding areas, you could do that. And it used to work right under Empire zones, they're few and far between, but it is something that, with a good community project that's going to require the support of all the taxing jurisdictions, something, you could put on the table. I just put that out there for thoughts in the future. And like I said, Kelly and I are speaking whatever next week or sometime,
Tomorrow.
I think tomorrow about that. So
Someday you're talking about it.
We talk multiple times every day.
So as we're talking, sorry, go ahead now. So, well, wait,
I was gonna go to a different topic, so.
I had a different topic too.
I was gonna suggest an idea I've been thinking about in terms of the policy that I think would address some of the issues we experience with hysteria, which involves an application issue as well as a policy issue. And I think it would be valuable to ask housing developers to provide data about their income bands they're intending their tenants to fall into. Like they have to do when they apply for low-income housing tax credits. So they're gonna have like 50% of our housing is gonna be for people at 50% AMI and another 30 is between 60%, that kind of thing. Ask them in the application to provide that information for tax credit projects or larger scale projects. I'm not talking about a 10-unit project necessarily, although maybe that would be helpful too. And then have a provision in which you hold them to meeting that income distribution in their project. Because they're modeling their project based on rents that they can receive at, 40% of the households are at 40% income and they're paying a rent that they can afford. So I think that would be really helpful to avoid the issue we had with hysteria, where we ended up with lots of people with very low incomes. And when it was clearly modeled to not meet that, it was modeled to have 40 permanent supportive housing, and the rest were supposed to all be people making 40 to 60% AMI. And that's not what we ended up with. So yet the IDA doesn't really have a provision to claw back on that basis because you don't ask that information in the application. And it's not a standard to abide by as a compliance issue. And it would be something you would be able to figure out at stabilization. Once they lease up, you would know it'd be a one-time snapshot. Look, you wouldn't be checking every 4 years. It would just be one-time check. Because, things are going to change over time.
You got to start somewhere.
But it would give you a sense of making sure that what was sold to the IDA
Right.
is what you delivered within reason. There are some special state laws that say, I think if somebody has a housing choice voucher, they have to be provided with, they're able to get into a low-income housing tax credit project. They can't be denied, I don't think, on their income basis. But I think you could, within reason, establish that as, again, you've been marketed something at the approval stage, and then make sure you get it at the implementation
It's a
stage.
good idea. Having a pulse should not be one of the criteria. I'm afraid
That is the source of income law, which, is under challenge in courts right now. I think that the additional units that were filled with extremely low income people at Asteria was because it was housing choice voucher supported.
The information I get is that there was a very small number. It wasn't responsible for the outcomes for that.
How were they just
The vetting process
gave them the
would
lower
be a
rent?
little bit lax. With their expectation.
Putting it very diplomatically.
As we should be.
But the rents are tied to income, so they were just getting a lot less rent, or the people were paying more than.
I'm not convinced they were getting any rents. many people.
Yeah, a follow-up was this week on that, I think. There were some temporary assistance programs that then timed out, and that's another, I think if you can, you don't want to make it so rigid that they can't show they did good faith effort to try to do it, because I think that you're not going to hit those income bands exactly, but you're also not going to be, 80% off or 100% off.
And we have, I want to maybe caution that we use our past experience, whatever that may be from, to inform, but not necessarily be the only thing that we remember about IDA projects, right? We've had projects that have been very successful and very smooth. We've had some projects with a few bumps, and we've had some, pretty disastrous projects on all fronts at all bands. And I just want to be cautioned that we're not building policy around one, but we're using, our learning from that to inform in a way. So I just give us that little asterisk to the conversation. So Shauna, then Jerry.
Yeah, I would actually love to open up some of these development areas. I'm at South Lansing, Town of Lansing, Varna, Dryden. I'm not sure if I would go on the west side, just because I don't think there's a whole lot of public transit. I feel like there's more public transit on the northeast side. And then, of course, the town. And I do think that, I think, Greg, it's your district, the Dryden area, has a lot of potential and a lot of land. And I feel like,
Well, and an appetite.
yeah, well, I think the criticism we've always received on the legislature is that people see it as Ithaca area development. And unfortunately, a lot of the people, many of the reps from the rural areas feel like you don't do any projects in their districts. And so they have not been supportive. There's not been a whole lot of buy-in from our rural area reps. So I think if we could open this up to more housing in other areas, I think, if you're talking about some land in Etna, you're going to be able to get a lot more bang for your buck than you would putting it in the city of Ithaca.
Right.
And that's where your numbers start to work for affordable housing. They're not going to work for the city of Ithaca. The math just doesn't work.
And I think too, as we look at some of the, sorry, Jerry, I didn't mean to.
Okay, go with it.
I think as we look to areas outside of the city that maybe give a different feel as we look towards the greater economic development strategy for our community, having more housing outside of the downtown core, the seat of the county, I think may potentially help with additional workforce or attract, some folks that may help then also promote the growth of industry or light manufacturing or some of our other economic strategies that we hope to get in. I wonder if some of that, some of those areas provide a little bit more free space, right? And different people are looking for different types of living, right? Some like the walkability of an urban environment. Some like a little bit more of that sort of country rural feel. And I'm trying to make sure I don't say anything that's like not appropriate. But it's, I think there could be some benefit to a larger strategy looking at some development areas outside of the city of Ithaca, which I think what we've done in the city and what the city has been able to do has been of benefit to the city for the most part, right? Maybe 80-85% in my opinion. But I think we really need to start looking at other places. I do think we need to get local municipalities on board, but I also think that we need to think also larger than just that local municipality and really help them see the bigger picture. And so how we come up with a strategy or a policy that we can then take and, you know, we can use our elected officials and, you know, concert with the folks at IAED and the county to go and sort of shop some buy-in. That's what I'd like to sort of see the next steps for this committee is what would a sample incentive type be? Maybe get some initial feedback, maybe look at sort of retooling that based on feedback, and then putting that to the IDA to sort of go forward with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and as we talk about outlying areas, you know, it is developing. Infrastructure is a huge, I mean, we can talk about transportation, but having the infrastructure there to actually create housing is, you know, is the question we're going to bump into with all these outlying areas. So I think having these conversations, you know, with these municipalities is really important to get a sense of what they feel their needs are and able to accommodate this. I just wanted to comment, Greg, on what you said earlier relative to policymaking and not being driven by our bad experiences because, you know, we have good, I mean, I think it is, we need to learn who our good developers are and who our not so good developers are. And the track record should carry, you know, or lack thereof, needs to carry some weight. Simple as that. I mean, it's not rocket science, but we've had some issues with specific individuals, with developers. And just because they have the money shouldn't be the reason we let them build.
I also wonder too, to the infrastructure point, and I'd love to explore what this model would look like if there, in some of these outlying areas, was a small, you know, some portion of the fee went to fund a infrastructure fund or did something like that. I mean, if we have enough large projects, right, and this is getting more into an IAED, IDA question, but if we have enough large projects to sort of fund the operation of the IDA, what's that point where we could maybe divert some funds or some fee, or maybe we take some of the larger project fee and put it into a infrastructure fund.
Threshold for projects that exceed X dollars. So this percentage will go towards this.
Right. We've had this we've dabbled in this conversation. I think it's an important one.
We need to solidify this conversation.
We need to, you know, stop kind of dancing around it and really see if we can put some structure to it.
And so Dave, I've got David, and then real quick, how then can we use that to assist what I personally feel is a need area is the for sale single family home project, which I know that there's rules against, which I think are silly rules. But I wish that there was maybe some way that we could support adjacent, right? And maybe that's through infrastructure. This idea of more single family or manufactured communities, whatever the case may be, so that we can get people out of this rent cycle and more into a, you know, wealth creation and stability cycle through single family home ownership. So I would like to see that part of a conversation at some point.
Yeah, and Greg, if I may, sorry to interrupt you. You know, you're certainly within your right. If you had a piece of property that you wanted to see developed with for sale homes, you know, the IDA certainly within its right to buy that property and resell it or give it to a developer you like to do it to reduce their costs. You're also able to incentivize even for sale, you know, individual home development projects. You can incentivize those at the outset by providing them the sales tax and the mortgage recording tax or a portion of it, and even abate the land tax until, you know, Russ Gensel comes in and buys a house and has to pay ad valorem taxes. Of course, you can't abate. You can, but it won't work. You know, an individual homeowner's ad valorem tax liability. But you could incentivize that type of development by helping out at the beginning.
Is that, I'm going to get David back to you in 1 second. Is that, sorry, someday. You're very patient, David. Is that,
So patient.
so patient. You work for government, so you must be. Is there appetite from this group to explore some sort of policy creation or path to assist in what Russ may have just outlined?
Absolutely.
David?
And Greg, further to my point, and then I'll shut up, is, the IDA, any IDA, you have flexibility. And I know the board has talked about, hey, maybe we should start buying property for development purposes. You have a lot of flexibility with the fee income that you receive. You can't give it away, you can't loan it. But you can invest it in infrastructure. You can invest it in land acquisition. You can invest it in buying a building and improving it. And so you have a lot of flexibility at the outset to do pretty much what you want in furtherance of your economic development purposes and powers, to do with that money what you think is best, other than give it away or loan it.
And we might better do it in a hurry before somebody sticks a solar farm on it, because there's a lot of that happening too.
I'm going to go to David now intentionally.
Yeah, I think the infrastructure discussion is really important and the tie-in with the potential to fund things, with the PIP. Particularly when I look at, there's a few areas that the town of Ithaca has designated for essentially entirely new neighborhoods, which are very expensive because you have to do roads and sidewalks and sewer lines. In locations that we've specifically planned for new development. I think you need to be very strategic and careful that we don't just fund infrastructure to a project because there's somebody who bought cheap land and they want to do a project there. That has very high costs down the line of, diverting a TCAP bus, and you add 5 minutes to the line, and you extend sewer in a place that you weren't planning to extend sewer, and it has higher costs per resident because it's really low density. I think making sure that it's targeted is important, but there are areas where we have room for new neighborhoods or substantial projects that would benefit from support and from this kind of thinking. But I do think it's really important to be sure that you don't just say, we'll do it anywhere and everywhere, because that leads to really high costs down the road. And it can get to be kind of a Ponzi scheme where you think, oh, we're going to get this, and you've already given up all the future revenue that you would get from it. And it's very expensive to serve in the long term. So it really is more affordable to keep density compact. And I think CTAP has been super effective. As a county, we flipped the percentage of development that was happening, eating up rural land in low density sprawl, and the number of units that were happening downtown. When I moved here, it was 60% of the development was happening outside of the city, or more. And now we flipped it so that more of the units are coming in the city, which has a lot of advantages to it. And you don't want to totally undo that, but it does make sense to target areas where it makes sense to have a new community that can be served efficiently with transit and fire and police and all the things that we provide in a coordinated and thoughtful way.
It gets pretty complex. I get it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not advocating for just running out into all the communities and building public housing out there. There's still people that want to stay within the urban sort of core. There's so many extenuating factors that go into these decisions. I'm just not sure we're involving all the players in a comprehensive conversation that would result in some intelligence that could go into all of this. I think I'm sure it's a good thing that we flipped that, making things more, and bringing it, into a little tighter. But, the other thing is, Teresa was making the point before, we're kind of running out of that kind of land downtown. So, we sort of, our options are becoming less and less. Again, this is no silver bullet, never has been. And it's a lot of people that have to be talked to about it.
David, and then I'm going to go back to Jerry for a second.
If I could just tie back to what we were just talking about, it would make a lot of sense if we had like a county-wide strategy for how we want to improve housing affordability, that we could have this conversation with all the municipalities and partners about where we want to focus development, and what kinds of things would go into it.
Jerry, yes. Absolutely. We'll park that. That sounds like it's on your work plan.
Yeah, really.
To use a planning term I love so much, planning. Jerry, who's missing from the conversation?
I think the governing bodies of these individual, I mean, certainly the planners in these individual communities
Great.
are not engaging. I mean, and we're finding that even at the IDA levels, we just talk about things like solar farms and things like that, trying to, create these, these projects happening. I think that they are by and large feeling left out in the cold, not engaged and sort of living in their own little worlds where to David's point, a more countywide, conversation happening with these individuals, understanding the limitations that we're facing, trying to understand the limitations they're facing and what we're trying to accomplish would be a very healthy conversation. Because right now what I see a lot of going on is a lot of finger pointing. Oh, it's your fault that didn't happen. It's the IDA did this. It's the county forgot to do that. The city messed this up. It's not productive. And I just don't know that I've seen, it's been a number of years ago, I sat in 2015 on it. I can't remember when I was sitting around the table. Much larger group of individuals was involved in the conversation, and I thought we were, making headway. Although it was sort of around the time that this other little policy that I couldn't really understand was going on. How we decided on this per unit thing. If you weren't going to develop X amount for workforce or affordable housing. But I have always felt that, or I have long felt that the conversation has been a little too one-sided, and we've not been open enough with our partners in outlying areas to kind of.
So let's change that. And Kelly, CJ is still at the town. Ray in Dryden, right?
Groton, who's in Groton? Didn't we just have a conversation with them around, was it Groton? Where were we talking about the solar farm? And it was like a lot of.
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure who the planner is there.
Anyway,
and then,
but to Shauna's point, when I think about where a lot of the transportation is on this northeast sort of, and it's driven somewhat by Cornell's, what their needs are in terms of moving people. But
Danby has a full part-time planner.
Full-time.
So maybe Danby, Dryden, the town of Ithaca.
Town of Lansing.
Or do they don't have a planner right now?
Yeah.
Oh, they got one.
Yeah. Nathaniel.
Yeah.
Oh,
Village?
so did they fill in? They took John's?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Gonna meet him tomorrow.
Okay. So maybe we could invite those 4 to start, or David, I would maybe leave it to you and Kelly to work with and have at our next housing meeting, maybe spend that time on a conversation with, no, it's nothing personal, but non-city, planning to sort of see how this group could be supportive, in terms of policy discussion. Would this be premature, or would this be good?
Would this be helpful and inform what we're trying to do?
I think it's something that county planning kind of has a track on as well, but it makes sense to start tying together. And I think it's good for us to start activities that feed into the strategy even before we have a consultant. We're going to be doing a lot of the legwork on that as staff, so there's no need to wait.
I want to be respectful of time, and I'd like to try to give us a few minutes back today, rather than use all our scheduled time. So if I could just maybe summarize, maybe some takeaways, for a long list of not to be finished next week, but to just sort of keep on our burner in the parking lot and pull things off as we can. maybe some updates to the workforce housing policy as it relates to smaller units, smaller
Creating
unit
some
count
threshold.
projects, some threshold. Maybe also a sort of a path or an easy application or something for those smaller to start to get a foot into the IDA conversation. Obviously, that needs to include development focus areas, et cetera. It can't just be anything, anywhere. Looking at, somebody help me out. What else was on this list without having to watch back the whole meeting?
Criteria for looking back at the Lisa.
Yeah, right.
Some bands.
That's part of that policy conversation, I think.
Yeah. And I think that
I
also,
don't think that really would be super helpful. At least it's any startup, having
point.
having to provide that at the outset of a project. I mean, it's right. Nothing's set in stone when you go into these things, but at least if there's a base, starting point that is based in reality and not just like made up numbers or like speculation.
And Russ, is that something, so when it comes to the income band verification application and then lease up or stabilization, we would reference that in the housing policy and then make note of it in the application that would need to be included.
Right, and we would have, a deliverable under the closing documents that at or before at stabilization or whatever date is appropriate, that they confirm that the representations that they made to the board and in the application have come to be.
Okay, thank you.
And then just real quickly, I in thinking through some of the concerns that are in the community now as a result of the Asteri project. I've had conversations in-house here with some partners of mine that do a lot of work with HUD and other state housing agencies, and we're going to come up with, or I'm going to come up with kind of a cold down version that I think might work for the IDA on future housing projects for safety measures, to kind of have some teeth in our compliance with all applicable law, language that's already in there. So that will be coming to the committee, and I think that's something that the board should consider, in the future. We certainly don't have the capacity to be a police force for housing projects and monitor them on a monthly basis. But I think if we were to have some more beefed up language in our documents regarding safety and cleanliness and that type of things that has come to light now, I think would be something the board should consider.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the alarms are going off way. I mean, not metaphorically, we're going off way
Actually,
ahead, way ahead of what this just happened there. I mean, there's documentation that goes back to within 3 months after they were open.
the ribbon cutting.
Well,
So,
and I'm sure that the people at this table, saw some of the reports and frankly, the disturbing pictures that were
right.
included
And
within those.
but there was no teeth. We have no teeth.
Well, we
and
do.
We have now.
We're from the IDA's perspective. I've got, as of recently as this morning, I have a meeting with him this afternoon, a litigator that I'm going to debrief on all of this.
Do we need to go to executive session?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so, because the default letter is out there, and we just need to be able to present to the board as your counsel, the options that you have. And it looks like they may have cured a default, but there may be others out there that we're unaware of. So that's at the 10,000 foot level, kind of the suggested plan or path forward for now, anyway.
Moving off of that topic, I guess I would also like to see at some point a sample policy proposal or strategy document or something of the sort for how we can work with single family projects. And maybe those are identified in certain areas based on our conversation with some of our municipal partners. But I think that really for 2025 should be some sort of goal to have something that we can really put out there or shop around, or wait till the end of the housing strategy at some point, depending on timing. But I think we should start having those conversations when developing something. Because it's an area that I think from a need, number one, but to Jerry's earlier points, from an image standpoint too, that's really providing, some strong incentive to be able to build something that has, real personal benefit to some individuals, to help keep costs down for those projects. Donna?
I would love for us to have a conversation with someone like Bruno Schickel, who, these houses that he's building in Freeville, the Boiseville, like those are, they're cute little houses.
Well, I've had this conversation for him. I mean, he said flat out, I went there because they welcomed me with open arms and they made it easy.
Yeah.
But those are also rentals, to be clear.
Yeah, I know.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's one on maybe Waterwack, and it's one of the cut through streets. I just wonder how much, from land acquisition to, finishing, how much one of those would cost. Because I think that there are probably a handful of people that wouldn't mind moving out of Cuga Heights with their, 5,000 square foot house to, as people age and whatever, wouldn't mind downsizing.
And those are custom houses too. I mean, there's modular stuff that can be considered, and created in a much more affordable way.
They're doing it in Dryden.
Right?
It's
I mean,
easier
this is,
to develop.
Really?
I think there's a lot of ways to skin this cat. I mean, but it is about finding, that sweet spot where people want it to happen
Mhm.
and people that are able to do it. Yes, and then throw in some infrastructure and, a lot of things have to come together. But I do think it's a good thing that we're talking about all these things. And I think this,
So maybe for round two, after we meet with our municipal partners, maybe we could meet with some private sector partners in this committee. And I would maybe lean on Jerry's experience, the, county planning and the IAED to identify who may be best to bring to that conversation around some of these more outlying, right? There's what I would call city developers really. And then I think there's some folks that have made a good run at the outlying areas. Maybe identify those to just get their perspective as data points. And Nels, I would your comments.
You're saying maybe after they're developed, that what are the potential tools the IDA can provide for that, then take that to that developers and say, does this address some, is this a valuable tool for you? Would you?
Mhm.
Because we might create all sorts of things and find out that it's not really very important. They have a different issue that's really their mind.
I mean, we can look at this more collaboratively, I think, than we have been. I mean, everybody comes to the IDA and goes, yeah, I want this, I want, we could do some more outreach in that regard. And I think that's a great idea to while we're bringing the governance, the municipality aspect to it, I think the people that we're asking to consider doing this building should also be at this table, as well as people that are going to finance these projects, beyond whatever, might come from IDA pilots or sales tax. I think this is how we will ultimately get everybody on the same page. Because right now we're not. And that's what I've felt like for quite a while. And I've sat in plenty of conversations about people who have wanted to do stuff, and it dies in certain area because somebody's missing from the conversation.
Well, let's not make things die in this group and let's bring them to life.
Well,
and let's keep progress moving forward. I see Shauna and then quickly here and then go ahead.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too, because if you all will remember many years ago, there was, they opened up, I think it's Vine Street in Bell Sherman, where they did the modulars and then the townhomes. And shockingly, those sat on the market for a very long time. They were a perfect price point. They were like $275, $350. And they sold
I'm surprised.
them.
I was surprised. I know.
Too.
I know.
And now they're going for 500, 550, 600, whatever.
And I remember that developer scratching his head and going, what the hell's going
They're
on?
adorable homes,
Yeah, but it's,
But I think it would be nice, maybe we.
I don't know what that conversation was,
Yeah,
though, Sean, at
yeah.
the time. I don't know.
I know.
This guy had his own thought about, what he
Yeah.
thought was gonna fit.
Yeah, yeah,
But I remember that.
yeah. I mean, I think maybe what we do is walk backwards a bit and say, what's gonna be the price point for a new family moving to Ithaca, young family? Is it 300? Is it 350? And then we walk backwards and see what can we get for 350,
Well, I think there's also a conversation, right? Young family, but also people trying to age in place, right? To your earlier comment about the Cuba Heights, because what we don't have is we don't have this price point for people to move up, right? You have to kind of jump a tier or two in price point
Yeah.
if you want to advance. There's not a natural progression of going from a $200,000 house to a 400
Yeah.
to a 600 to an 800,
Oh,
or staying at whatever price point, you want to be in and just living comfortably within your means. So I think that's a good question, but I also think this idea of looking at our senior population and having some of that age in place conversation is helpful to maybe free up some inventory that's better served by a family that may have 4 or 5 or 6, people living in under one roof. Teresa, and then we're going to wrap up.
And I think in all this discussion, you're always assuming that the taxpayers of the city of Ithaca are going to subsidize the parking of all these outlying people every time they come in to work or to shop or whatever. Because they howl that the parking is not, and there are all sorts of little illicit private parking deals being cut. It's a mess when you drive people into cars.
Well, I can tell you, someone who drove into the city from an outlying area and paid my $5.50 to park for this meeting.
Yeah, right.
I am not asking you to subsidize.
Right.
I have paid my fair share for my parking spot for the hour and a half I was here.
However, I wonder whether it's actually covering the cost. That's a good,
Sure.
I don't know.
I would also be curious to see if, Nels, do you know, did the city increase parking enforcement on Saturdays when they're charging for parking now?
That's the plan. I
They haven't
think
yet.
that they have not reallocated staff to walk the neighborhoods on Saturday, but
So there's no
It's
real,
going to the police, as I understand right now, Saturday enforcement.
interesting.
it was it was part of the budget for 2026, so there'll be a 2027 budget where things will be reevaluated.
Right.
Yeah, the revenue was, but maybe not the expense.
It is worth noting that the city does lose money on the parking.
Yeah.
It's not,
Overall,
Yeah.
on-street parking probably makes money, parking
Yeah.
garages lose money. We think there's about a $2 million per year deficit.
But who has the- what is the
It's
biggest,
a massive problem.
what municipality has the largest tax base in Tompkins County?
Municipality?
Yeah,
Ithaca.
That's a good
the
question.
city of Ithaca.
Oh.
But I don't know.
Most of our, majority of our land is tax exempt.
No.
You're talking about taxable value.
Yeah,
total or per
Maybe.
acre?
total.
And just one other thing I want to throw in the mix, and we don't have to talk about it today, but incentivizing conversion of rental property to home ownership. If there was some way to help fund that, because we have so much rental property within the city of Ithaca.
Maybe that's on the mortgage recording tax side.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying that there would be people that if there was some incentive to take some of these places that were once nice single family homes and have been turned into, 5 units, or whatever, that there might be a path there for some home ownership.
That are assessed at $250.
Jay, don't touch this.
Well, I want to keep to my word that we'll return some time to your agendas today. Kelly, it sounds like there's some post-meeting follow-up and some out.
Yeah.
And we look forward to sort of a menu of options to discuss in this committee. I always feel like every time we meet, we add to your work plan. But I appreciate everybody's time. It is 11:55. We'll stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Greg.